want to tell you about why people were even interested in doing it. I will say this, though, that we had the elections in 1973, and we established a 15-member council, 3 at large, that is throughout the jurisdiction, which would be the county, city and county all together in one. And then we had 12 single-member districts, which we have now. 108 people filed to run for those 15 positions, which is pretty good. You don't get that much now because you got incumbents, and they figured they can't beat them. So back then you didn't have any incumbents, so that was a lot exciting. And I will say this, that Bill Lyons, who wrote the book that I've lent to Luke on how it happened politically, it's a nice little book that tells you the story. He later ran for council and was elected. So he, the fellow who helped us write it, the professional, served on the council and served well, of course. He died some years ago, unfortunately. We started in January 1, 1974. The vote was in November of 72, so we had about 13, 14 months to get ready. And we sort of looked at each other. We'd worked so hard. I made 100 talks, I guess. We would go to, in the campaign, to coffees in people's living room and all sorts of church gatherings and any kind of gathering. And then it was adopted by a 69% majority. And it had many advantages for a lot of people. Our African American community only had one African American elected in the history of Lexington, was Harry Sykes, who stood above everybody at about 6, 7, or 8. He played basketball for the Harlem Globetrotters, and he was a math major, nice guy, still with us, and he was able to be elected in the city, in the city government. But the way we worked it, the single-member districts, we had always 3 members of the African American community, and sometimes 4, and we still do, and they still are a big voice in what happens. The Court of Appeals, which was the highest court at that time, was we hadn't had the constitutional amendment in '76, which unified the state courts, and which I worked for that too. But we were concerned that we wanted the plan to be approved by the court so that actions we took would not be questioned later. So we pushed on that, and it was approved, I think December 30 of 1973, and we took office on the 1st, of 74. One of those judges told me it messed up his whole Christmas because he was studying so hard about the legality of this new creature. It really was new to Kentucky, certainly. So what did we get? Well, we got a mayor as a mayor-council form of government, 15 members, I mentioned that. The mayor had 4-year terms, as did the at-large candidates. Originally, in this document, they had 2 successive terms for the at-large and the mayor. The single-member districts could run, I think, 3 times. They had 2-year terms. So you get a pretty good turnover if you want changes of opinion about what the government's doing. Since then, when Scotty Basler was mayor and some others, he wanted to run again. So he got some support and went to the state government and extended it to a 3rd consecutive term before you have to bow out. And also extended the single-member district terms to 5 2-year terms, so you can serve 10 years. That's worked pretty well. I happened to be against that, and I went down there. Scotty was my vice mayor when I was mayor, a good friend. In fact, I sold him a car once. I don't think he ever forgave me. But, you know who I'm talking about, Scotty. I just thought that, and I still do, that for any position, head of a bank, head of some, whatever, or in a corporation, the head person, after about 8 years, I think, begins to rest on his or her oars, as I call it. They're not pulling. They're not, now there are exceptions, I'm sure, but at least in government, that's what I felt. But, you know, it's not the end of the world. It's worked so far. Because we've had 2 recent mayors who were turned out after 1 term. So no one has gone. Although Scotty was elected the 3rd time, but then he decided to run for governor and for the legislature, in the United States House. Also, in this plan, the laws pertaining to county government and that of city government would be put together, and if there was a conflict, we said the laws of the city would prevail. And we had some interesting things like the leash law in the county. How does that work? Well, we resolved that without much trouble. They don't have to worry about that on farmland. One of the things that I think was pretty important for us, and one of the reasons, which I'll get into shortly, for wanting to do this was whether or not, how do you tax people for the various services you get? So we ended up, we were copying another community that did this. I think it was Nashville. We have certain service districts and taxing districts based on the services you receive. Annexation was a dirty word back in the 50s and 60s because they were concerned that you'd annex, the city would annex, and then they wouldn't get all the services they want, like sanitary sewers or garbage collection or something else. And they're fairly expensive services. So we put in there that in the charter, that of those 4 services, including street lights and street cleaning, would not be, you wouldn't be charged. We broke it down, the value of the tax, the property tax for that, would not be charged unless you had the service. So that compelled the city to go ahead and sewer some areas that were desperately needed. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons people voted to have a merged government, because we had about 65,000 citizens in the county outside the city limits. And about 60,000 of those would be urbanized county. That is to say, they'd been passed over, they were older communities by the University of Kentucky in the county. So they didn't have sidewalks, they didn't have, the worst thing they had septic tanks, it's fairly small lots that were out perking, and they were in trouble. Every time it rained, it all kind of came up. And they had a difficult time mortgaging it and selling the house. And so that's a pretty serious problem. And for whatever reason, the county government never felt it could build sewers. So it was a city obligation. And so that's one of the things we did as soon as the merger. We set about providing for sewers in all those urbanized county areas. And we got it all done, not without some noise, however, because one fellow said, "My septic tank's working fine. Put in the sewer for the guy next door." No, we can't do that. There's an engineering reason why you do it, a neighborhood one time. But we gave him 2 years to get on it, and all that works. Let me go and talk to you now about, incidentally, when we consolidated, as you all know, cities are an act of the legislature, but the counties are established by the Constitution. So when we merged, December 31, 1973, the city evaporated. You know, it's kind of like one of those television programs where you go away. So the city did not exist. Now, I was the only elected person of the city, or of the whole organization, of city or county, whose term would be cut in half. Because I had a 4-year term, I was elected to start serving in 72, and in beginning of 74, it was gone. Well, that suited me fine. I used to say, vote for this plan of consolidation, and I'll get out of this difficult job. I should have listened to my own advice. But I stayed on, and of course ran again in 1973, which is when we did provide for the elections. And you need to provide for a year in which the county officers are going to be elected. That is, and so we did that, and I was elected with some difficulty, but I was elected. And then I was there to administer, put it back together. We had, let me talk to you about that. Let me talk to you about why there was an urgency to do this. I've mentioned the sanitary sewers. Very important. We had a very strange city boundary because it was created by voluntary annexation. This is a developer of a subdivision would say, take me in because I want sewers. And then you do this. It looked like a Rorschach test at the boundary. And it made some real problems with fire and police protection. You know, a house gets on fire, and the person calls, and probably calls the city, but it's in the county. And they say, sorry, call the county. And they had 3 stations and 3 that's it for the whole county. You know, we had 275 square miles. The city was about 75 square miles, and we had 8 or 10 stations for the city, and they had 3, and they were sort of thought they ought to be taking care of barn fires and things. And the city would send a truck and squirt water on the house next door, which was in the city, so it didn't catch on fire, and they had to wait for the county service to come and put out the fire on the county house. And picking up garbage, you go one house, and then the 3 houses are in the county, and then you got some more city houses. Pretty wild. And we also had the same thing with parks. There was a separate parks department for the city and the county, and they'd, you know, take all their mowers, and the county would pass city parks and mow a county park, and vice versa. The city would do the same. So that what we were able to, and also in police protection, we had at that time 250 policemen covering 27 square miles of the urbanized area in the city. And the county had 42 policemen covering 256 square miles. And, you know, they'd run into each other, maybe trying to solve the same crime, because there's not much coordination. The whole thing didn't make sense. And then in the time it would take for a county fire truck to get to a county property was considerably longer than necessary. And of course, the homeowner had to pay substantial premiums. Some of these urbanized county were a class 7, and then you get out in the country, it'd be a class 10 maybe. Within the city of Lexington, basically, it was a class 3. Now, you all are familiar, I know you are, of how the ISO, the Insurance Service Organization, classifies properties for protection, you know. And it makes a lot of difference in your homeowner's policy. When we consolidated and were able to put all of the stations together, city and county, we had some city stations closer to county fires than the county could possibly be. We dropped all of that area that was a class 7 to a class 3. Just snap your fingers, because you can deploy our people together. And that was worth, even the first year, about $3 million savings in insurance premiums, plus to say nothing of saving your life and your property.